You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We now turn to our Reporters Roundtable. Joining us today, it's Brenden Moore with Lee Enterprises and Ben Szalinski with the Daily Line. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cole.
Always a pleasure, Cole.
Hope you guys are well rested. We had a very late night / early morning at the end of the House's session. They get the budget passed around 3:30, but then it took a whole lot longer to get the revenue and the BIMP and everything else across the finish line. Very chaotic ending to the House's session here. Brenden, I want to start with you. This is now, 6 years in the Capitol for you? Is that?
Give or take, I've been around.
Yeah, been around. So just, this was unique when we're getting down to procedural rules at the very end of a session. Republicans obviously trying to throw everything they could to stop that revenue bill from getting passed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not very often that Republicans who are in the super minority, it's a 78-40 split for Democrats and Republicans, that they get to influence the events in the chamber. But they did have this unique opportunity because you have one seat's vacant, Democratic seat's vacant, you had 5 members that were not here, and then you had a lot of them that either would not, or the Democrats are trying to protect them from having to vote for a tax increase in an election year. So you have these dynamics where Republicans could really, I want to say meddle or play some legislative tricks. They requested a verification of the roll call, which means you have to vote your own switch. There were 60 votes. They read the names of the yes votes. State Representative Aaron Ortiz from Chicago was not in the chamber. He was not even in Springfield anymore, so they struck him from the roll. They had to vote again. They did it again. Again, they had 60 votes, but one of the votes was a Republican who quickly dipped out of the chamber. So the Republicans struck him from the roll. So we had to do one more time, and the third time was the charm. They eventually did get it after a very chaotic scene. Really was kind of an embarrassing show for supermajority Democrats. They did not have their act together. It was a tough vote because you can argue that the tax increases that they pass are not going to hit a lot of everyday Illinoisans. I mean, we're talking about sports books, we're talking about large corporations, but it's still a tax increase, and it's an election year, and you have a lot of members that do not want to vote for that and some of them have some tougher races. So it was, I think we kind of foresaw it when you only had 65 votes on the budget, 62 on the BIMP. The revenue is probably going to be the toughest one. And they got it done. They landed the plane, but they barely avoided a crash landing.
Ben, this was such an interesting year because it was a tight budget year, trying to pass, whatever it is, it's still $900,000 or $900 million in tax increases in a budget year. That is just a headline that is going to be easily put against Democrats come November. And all of that's to say they still pass a budget with 1.6% increase in spending. And I wonder after we heard for months that revenues maybe weren't there, spending, or there might have to be some cuts. This may be difficult. We still see even higher than what Governor Pritzker proposed back in February. It was just interesting to see that be the culmination of all of this.
Right, and I think that's one of the interesting parts is that this budget is bigger than what Governor Pritzker proposed. The governor, he's always liked to talk about how his budget proposals are on the conservative side, and yet legislators, they found a way to increase the revenue to pass a more robust spending plan that's $400 million larger than what he asked for. So I think, all this talk that we saw all spring about, there might actually be budget cuts instead of a budget increase because Democrats are having a hard time getting on board with the tax plan. Obviously, we certainly saw that Democrats had a hard time getting on board with raising taxes and raising revenue to pay for their tax plan. But I think it really set up this question that a lot of legislators, including Democrats, were asking on Wednesday morning is, how are we going to be able to continue on this current pace of spending and current pace of new taxation next year when we have more holes in the budget to cover for Chicago area transit agencies, for various expenses that are continuing to rise in state government, various priorities that lawmakers have. And as Representative Fred Crespo from the Northwest Suburbs said, he essentially said that we're going to the well for taxes right now, and that's drying up another source that lawmakers could have tapped into next year when that money is arguably going to be much more needed to actually fill these budget holes.
And if I can add to that, Ben, it is more than just Republicans, and it's more than just Fred Crespo that are concerned about spending. You have Democrats, some other moderates, but also some progressive members that will tell you privately that, yeah, we are going to have some problems next year, that we are spending at a clip that may not be sustainable. I mean, you just have, those inflationary increases. I mean, you have salaries that go up. They obviously have now invested more than $2 billion in evidence-based funding since it was enacted, and that's going to pressure's going to be on to keep that investment up. And the governor was asked about it earlier this week in his end of session press conference, and he just kind of dismissed it, basically saying that they've said this every year, that it's not sustainable and that we're not going to be able to balance the budget, but we've done it every year. And that is true, at least based on what has transpired. But it is getting to a point where, I think his first budget was like $39 billion in spending, and now we're up to 53. Again, it's one of those things where, there's a lot of needs and a lot of members want to support initiatives in their districts, and it's hard to kind of keep a conservative budget in that sense when you have that many priorities you want to fund. But there is an acknowledgement, though, among a lot of folks that next year might be tough, especially if their revenues continue to slow.
Yeah, and it is very interesting, and I know there's obviously where this money kind of ends up coming from is not as simple as this. But when you look at the tax increases themselves, the amount of money that those are going to bring in, you have it almost equates perfectly to two separate real initiatives. The amount of money that the state is having to spend is sending to Chicago, and the amount of money that was on that non-citizen health insurance plan. And also Governor Pritzker's key initiatives going forward. I mean, he's in a tight budget year. He's putting a huge investment into quantum technology, this quantum campus that he wants to build. $500 million is nothing. That's a 1% of the budget. I mean, when you're looking at it from that perspective,
right.
I know that it's not one-to-one. I know that money is not going to that, but I'm just saying there's those legislative priorities, and then there's also the governor's priorities, and it seems like a lot of them made it into both of them. But both made it in there.
I would say, yeah, despite all of that, all those budget pressures, and all the maybe some hand wringing and some difficulty getting to the end, getting everybody on board, the governor pretty much got everything that he wanted in this session. He's used to that. I mean, he's basically gotten, I think the graduate income tax is maybe the only thing, and that was obviously the voters denied that. But yeah, from his healthcare initiative, reining in prior authorization and banning step therapy, and going after ghost networks, obviously some of his initiatives with maternal health, they all got in, and obviously Smart Start, his pre-K plan continued to be funded, evidence-based funding continued to go up. So the governor has a lot of wins, and obviously quantum. And if you talk with the governor for even a few minutes about quantum, you will know it's one of his pet projects. He loves talking about this issue, kind of uses it as the future economic development in the state. But so he got a lot. He got everything pretty much he wanted this session. But I think that as these budget pressures continue, and maybe if we see revenue to dip or to grow a little more slowly next year, that it might be more of a difficult conversation.
But again, and from his perspective, I guess it's getting closer to the end of his second term, even closer when we get to next year. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about, in the Senate especially, Brenden, you noted it a lot, but there was the talk of Pritzker using this as his political ambitions and everything like that. But we hit on it earlier. There's a lot of legislative initiatives in there as well. There's a lot of stuff that is going to help Democrats going into the November election. And it was just very interesting this year to watch those, seemingly everybody who's on the same team in this sense, battle it out and fight for that in such a pivotal election year going forward.
Right, and I think that's also the one reason you saw at least some Democrats vote no on the budget is because they're facing tough elections in their districts. A lot of suburban legislators. Brenden mentioned Sharon Chung. She's a vulnerable downstate representative. A lot of them, I think, are a little bit wary of being looped into the headlines about tax increases or increases in spending, and I think they're kind of sensitive to, not that they don't support what's going into the budget and the governor's initiatives. I think they're just more trying to protect themselves, is why you're seeing some of this Democrat pushback. But there certainly are those who are definitely very concerned about where we're going with our budgets on the spending and the taxation. And I guess just going back to Governor Pritzker's future there, essentially on the legislative calendar, we're 2 years into his 4 years of his second term session-wise. So we're going to start probably seeing movement on his political future front, whether that's not running for governor in 2 years or running for governor for a third term. And he's going to be trying to push these initiatives that are very popular with voters, such as health insurance reform that received bipartisan support, to boost whatever it is he wants to do 2 or 4 years from now.
All right, well, we're going to come back in just a minute. I'm going to pull a House of Representatives and keep Ben and Brenden in the building a little bit longer. We'll come back and talk about some of the things that didn't get done this spring legislative session. We'll be right back.